19 days after I buried my husband, his mother sent me an eviction notice, and she sent it certified mail to the kitchen table where I was still writing thank you notes for funeral casseroles. 30 days to vacate. The house, it turned out, had never been ours. It belonged to the Whitaker Family Trust, which meant it belonged to her, and we had been, in the letter's actual language, tenants at will, and the will was hers, and it had run out 19 days after her son stopped breathing. That was a Tuesday. Wednesday, two men from the family dealership came for the truck, my truck, the one I drove to work because it was titled to the business, and one of them, a kid I went to high school with, could not look at me while he put it on the flatbed. And Friday, I called about the savings, ours, $31,000 that my husband had moved 8 months earlier into something his mother called the Family Land Partnership. And a lawyer with a soft voice explained to me that it had been a capital contribution, not a deposit. Contributions are not refundable, Mrs. Whitaker. That is what he called me while he took the last of it. Mrs. Whitaker, 27 years old, friends. Widowed 9 weeks after my 4th wedding anniversary, and in 19 days I lost the house, the car, and the savings, in that order, to a woman who stood next to me at the graveside in matching black and held my hand. And when I went to her, when I actually stood in her kitchen and asked her why, my mother-in-law folded her reading glasses and looked at me with her son's eyes, which is the cruelest thing God lets happen in families. And she said the sentence this whole story grew from. She said, "You were his wife for 4 years, Meg. I was his mother for 27. Everything he had came from us, and now it comes back to us. You can keep the grief. You can keep the grief." Hold on to that sentence, friends, because at the very end of this story, in a cemetery, in June, that sentence is going to come back with its edges turned around, and you will want to remember exactly how she said it the first time. 3 promises before we go back, so you know what kind of night you are settling in for. First, there is a spiral notebook in this story with one word on the cover in my husband's handwriting, and I am going to show you what was inside it, because everything I built, and I built something, friends, the title told you that much, everything I built was already drawn in that notebook, in pencil, by a dead man. Second, there is an invoice. 14 months after the funeral, a farm supplier 40 minutes away called me about an order sitting in their cold storage, paid in full, in my husband's name. And when I tell you what he had bought, and when he had bought it, and why, you are going to need a minute, friends. I needed a season. And third, the field. There is 6 acres of dirt in this story that my mother-in-law tried to buy out from under me with cash, above asking, for one reason only, because I was standing on it. And you are going to be at the closing table when an 80-year-old woman named Dot chooses between her money and mine, and you are going to hear what Dot knew that nobody else knew, and friends of everything in this story, that is the part I still cannot tell out loud without stopping. If you have ever lost everything that had someone else's name on it, do one thing for me before we start. Tap that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories where the ones who lost everything build the unlosable, and tell me in the comments one thing you own that nobody can repossess. Mine has roots, friends. Literally. We are getting there. My name is Meg. I am 29 years old. I grow flowers for a living on land I own. And 2 years ago, I was sleeping on my friend Jamie's couch with everything I still owned in 4 trash bags. Stay with me. Every seed in this story gets planted before we are done. Cole Whitaker was the kind of man this channel does not get to keep, so I will give him to you quickly while it still only aches. I met him at 22 at the farmer's market of all places, both of us reaching for the same flat of tomato starts, and he let me have it, and then bought me a coffee to, his words, negotiate visitation rights to the tomatoes. He was a diesel mechanic at his family's dealership, the only Whitaker who came home with dirt under his nails. And that detail, friends, that detail is the whole map of everything that happened later. Because the Whitakers are a name in our county. The dealership, the storage units, the land partnership, a family that measures itself in titles and deeds. And Cole was the one son who wanted none of it, who wanted, and I can quote it exactly because I have the notebook, a patch of good dirt, a greenhouse, and you. We married when I was 23, and I want to be fair to Corinne from the start, friends, because cartoon villains teach you nothing, and my mother-in-law is not a cartoon. She is a woman who built a fortress out of a family, who loved her son with the totality that certain mothers mistake for ownership, and who regarded me from the first Sunday dinner with the polite patience you give a phase. That was the word I once overheard, friends. The market girl is a phase. 4 years of marriage, and I never graduated from phase. And the tragedy of Corinne Whitaker, the actual tragedy, is that she was so busy waiting for her son's real life to start that she missed the entire happiness of the one he had. We lived in the little house on Concord Street, a trust property, always described at dinners as good as yours someday. And we drove vehicles titled to the business, always described as one of the perks. And when we saved hard, market money, and overtime, $31,000 in 4 years, and 8 months before the ice, Corinne convinced Cole to park it in the family land partnership, where money grows, honey, instead of sitting in a bank being lazy. Do you see it now, friends? I did not. I was 26 and in love and busy, and it took the certified letter to teach me what my mother-in-law had understood all along. Every single thing in our life had a string on it, and every string ran back to one hand. We owned nothing, friends. We had the use of things, and the difference between owning and having the use of, I learned it in 19 days, is the difference between a marriage and a lease. And Corinne Whitaker had never once, not for one Sunday dinner, mistaken which one I was on. Let me show you 3 Sunday dinners from those 4 years, friends, because you should see the strings being strung, and because I need you to see Cole inside his own family, the way I got to see him, so you understand exactly what was lost and exactly what was worth building after. Dinner 1, the first year, the prenup that wasn't. 2 months before our wedding, Corinne raised it at the table the way she raised everything, as a service. She said, "We have had Hollis draw up a little agreement, standard for families with holdings. Nothing personal, Meg. You understand. It protects everyone." And I, 23 and terrified of forks with that many cousins, said something like, "Of course, whatever's normal." And Cole put down his glass. And friends, my husband did not fight loudly, ever. That was not his tool set. He fought the way he fixed engines, quietly, by knowing where the actual problem was. He said, "Sure, Mom. We'll sign it the same day the house on Concord gets put in my name instead of the trust. Fair's fair. Protection all around." And the table went very quiet, friends. And Corinne smiled and said, "We'll table it." And that was the last anyone ever spoke of the little agreement because he had put his finger straight on the tell. They did not want paper between me and nothing. They wanted paper between me and everything, while making sure everything stayed titled as nothing. I did not fully understand what I had watched until years later, friends. He understood it in real time. He just thought he had more time to fix it than the ice gave him. Dinner 2, year 3, the job. Corinne spent an entire pot roast recruiting Cole off the shop floor and into the dealership office. The word she used was finally, as in time to finally step up, honey, and the argument had a shape I want you to memorize because half of you are living inside some version of it. Every step up she offered came with a title change. Friends. Every title change moved something of his out of his hands and into the structure, the truck he drove, the hours he kept, the money he made. All of it would flow through the family's paper instead of his own 2 hands. And my husband ate his pot roast and listened all the way through because he was polite like Dotsfield is flat, deceptively. And then he said the sentence I still say to myself when the farm gets offers. He said, "Mom, I make things run for a living. Up in that office, things run me. I'll stay where I can see the tools." And driving home that night, he was quiet. And then at a red light, he said, out of nowhere, hands still on the wheel, "They don't hate you, Meg, you know. It's worse. You're the first thing I ever picked out that they can't put a title on, and they don't have a shelf for that, so they keep calling it a phase and waiting for it to depreciate. And then he laughed at his own joke, friends, because he always laughed a beat before you did, and I laughed too, at 25, in a truck the family owned, at a red light, not yet knowing I had just heard the entire next decade of my life diagnosed at 40 miles an hour. And dinner 3. Friends, the last Christmas. 7 weeks before the ice. Gift time at Corinne's, everything wrapped in matching paper, the good kind of theater, and Corinne's gift to us that year was an envelope. And inside the envelope was a brochure for a homeowner's insurance policy and a note that the trust had, quote, restructured some properties for tax efficiency. Nothing that affects you too. And Cole read it twice. And I watched something settle in his face, some column finally reconciling. Because tax efficiency, friends, we learned at the eviction, had moved the little house on Concord out of the branch of the trust with his name in it and into the branch with only hers. 7 weeks before he died. I do not believe, hear me, I do not believe Corinne knew the ice was coming. Nobody knows the ice is coming. That is what ice is. But I know what my husband did the first week of January because the dates are on the paperwork I found later. The first week of January, Cole Whitaker paid cash for 200 peony roots. And the second week of January, he drove out Millbrook Road and put a $100 bill in an 80-year-old woman's hand. He read that Christmas envelope, friends, and he stopped waiting. He was building us an exit made of dirt and roots, off the family's paper entirely, cash and handshakes, where the strings couldn't see, and he was 5 weeks from telling me when the bridge deck iced. Getting close. Tell her. He never got to. So the dirt told me instead, friends, 1 receipt at a time, over 3 years. And if you want to know why I believe the dead leave instructions, it is because I have spent my whole new life following mine. The notebook first, friends, because you cannot understand what I built without standing where it was drawn. Cole kept a spiral notebook in his truck, 99 cents, coffee rings on the cover, and on the cover, in his blocky mechanic's handwriting, 1 word, someday. It was our joke and our religion, friends, both. Someday was where we kept everything the strings could not reach. On rainy Sundays, he would pull it out and we would work on it like other couples work on crosswords. And inside that notebook, in pencil, in 2 handwritings, was a farm. 6 acres. He always said 6. Don't ask me why. I asked him why once and he said, I've seen the field, Meg. It's 6. I thought it was a figure of speech, friends. Remember that. A greenhouse, drawn to scale, twice, because we argued about the door. Rows and rows and rows of flowers, because that was my half of the dream. I had run the flower stall at the market since before we met, buckets of other growers' blooms, and what I wanted, all I ever wanted, was to sell what I grew. Peonies, underlined 3 times in his hand with a note that said, her favorite, plant first. A list titled Customers Someday with 4 names on it, all our market friends. And on the last used page, dated 5 weeks before the ice, a budget, his careful mechanics columns, land down payment, used tractor, deer fence, and at the bottom, circled twice, a number and 3 words. Getting close. Tell her. He never told me, friends. Whatever it was, whatever he was getting close to, the ice came first. A February morning, a bridge deck, a man driving early to open the shop so another mechanic could take his kid to the dentist, because that was Cole, friends, dead at 27, doing somebody else a small kindness. And I have made my peace with the ice, mostly, some winters, and this story is not about the ice. It is about what the ice left. 19 days of letters and flatbeds, and by the end of that month I was on Jamie's couch with 4 trash bags. And here is the inventory of what the strings could not reach. Friends, the complete list of what a Whitaker widow owns outright. My clothes, my grandmother's cast iron pan, a coffee ring notebook that said, someday, and a folding market table, because the flower stall, my little bucket stall, had always been mine, license, table, and name, too small for anyone to bother titling. Hold that, friends. The one thing too small for them to take was the seed of everything they could never touch. I should tell you about the last night in the Concord house, friends, and about the toolbox, because the 4 trash bags were not quite the whole inventory, and the missing piece arrived in a way I still cannot think about in cold weather without my eyes going. Packing a house you are being evicted from by your mother-in-law is its own kind of archaeology. The trust's letter had been specific: fixtures and furnishings conveyed with the property, which meant the furniture we had used was staying. Most of it had been in the house when we moved in anyway, strings upon strings. And so what I actually packed came down to clothes: the cast iron, photographs, the notebook, and the small, strange midden of a man's daily life. His reading glasses, drugstore, one arm bent from his pocket. A valve spring on the windowsill he had kept for reasons I will never know now. And that is the true cruelty of sudden death, friends. It takes the answers to 1,000 questions you had not asked yet. His good boots, which I could not take and could not leave, and finally took. And on the last night, 10 o'clock, boxes by the door, there was a knock, and I opened it to the kid from the flatbed. Friends, the one from my high school year who had come for the truck and could not look at me. Tyler. Standing on the porch in the dark, out of uniform, with his own pickup idling in the street, and he would not come in, and he talked fast and quiet, the way you talk when you have decided to do something before your nerve reads the fine print. He said they had us detail the truck for the front lot, and the toolbox was still in the bed, his rolling box, and the service manager said inventory it. It goes with the vehicle, assets of the business, and Meg, I looked it up. The truck's titled to the company. The box was Cole's. He bought it off old Ray when Ray retired. Cash. I was standing there. I helped him load it. Nobody titles a toolbox. And he put the tailgate down, friends, and there it was, 400 pounds of my husband's working life. Every drawer packed the way mechanics pack them, which is to say perfectly, wrenches descending like organ pipes, and Tyler and his cousin wrestled it into Jamie's garage that same night on a hand truck, before anyone at the dealership did any counting. And when I tried to thank him, the kid just shook his head and said, "He covered my Saturdays when my daughter was born. Twice. Tell nobody." And he drove off, friends. And I stood in Jamie's driveway at 11 at night next to a stolen, unstolen toolbox, crying over socket wrenches. Here is why the toolbox matters, friends, beyond the ache of it. Every bed on Someday Farm was built with his tools. The first hoops of the first tunnel, bent on a jig I made following a video, held in his vise. The market stand, his drill. The greenhouse door, the one drawn twice, hung on its hinges with his impact driver on a Sunday evening while 40 people ate chili. And my crew knows the rule without being told. The tools go back in the box, wiped down, drawers closed because the box is not storage, friends. The box is staff. And one drawer, the shallow top left, I have never emptied and never will. His gloves are in it, shaped the way leather keeps hands. A pack of gum, ancient now, and a folded page of graph paper with half a sketch of a greenhouse bench in pencil, measurements in his blocky numbers, unfinished midline. Friends, the pencil line just stops, the way everything just stopped, and some February mornings, the hard ones, the ice anniversary ones, I open that drawer before the crew comes, and I put my hand flat on the gloves for a minute, and then I close it and go bend steel. That is allowed, friends. Whatever anyone tells you about moving on, hear me. You are allowed one drawer. Keep one drawer. Grief does not need the whole house. It never did. It needs one drawer that never gets inventoried, and then it will let you build with the rest of the box. I would love to tell you I rose from that couch like a phoenix, friends, but this channel does not lie, so here is the true version of the next 4 months. I cried in a storage unit, twice. I worked doubles at the garden center for $11 an hour, watering other people's someday. I Googled things like widow rights house not in husband's name at 2 in the morning and learned from a legal aid clinic with folding chairs that Corinne had built her fortress well. The trust was old and clean. The truck was legitimately the company's, and the partnership money would cost more to fight than it held. And the young lawyer, trying to be kind, said the sentence that finished the demolition. She said, legally, "Mrs. Whitaker, you were never really on anything. Never really on anything, friends. 4 years of a marriage, and the paper agreed with my mother-in-law. I was a phase, notarized. And I want to mark the exact bottom for you, friends, because every rebuild has one, and you should know what mine looked like. It was a Tuesday in June, 4 months after. I had walked to the cemetery after my shift, still in the garden center apron, and I was sitting by Cole's stone doing the thing widows do, narrating, telling him about my day like he was late for dinner, and I heard a car, and it was Corinne's. She came up the row with roses from the florist in town, wrapped in cellophane, and she stopped when she saw me and friends. For 1 second, we were just two gutted women at the same stone, and it could have gone another way. The whole story could have gone another way right there. And then she looked at my apron, the garden center name tag, the dirt on my knees, and she said, not cruelly. Friends, that is the thing about Corinne. Never cruelly, always factually, she said. He would hate seeing you like this. You should go back to your people, Meg. There's nothing holding you here now. Nothing holding me here. 20 feet from her son's name in granite, friends. And I stood up, in my apron, with my dirty knees, and something in me that had been lying flat for 4 months rolled over and stood up too. And I heard myself say, calm as dirt, you're wrong. There's a field. I hadn't planned to say it, friends. I did not even fully know what I meant yet. But Corinne Whitaker heard something in it she did not like. I watched it cross her face, and she said, what field? And I said, his. And I put my hand flat on the top of the stone the way you touch a shoulder, and I walked out of that cemetery past her cellophane roses, and I went home to Jamie's couch, and I took the someday notebook out of the trash bag, and I read every page like scripture until 3 a.m. And at 3 a.m, friends, on a borrowed couch, at the bottom of everything, I made the decision this entire channel exists to witness. She had taken everything with his name on it. Fine. I would build the thing that had no name on it yet. I would build the someday. Now friends, because every rebuild needs a door, and mine was 80 years old and smoked a pipe on her own porch like a dare. Dorothy Ansell has owned land out on Millbrook Road since before the county paved it, a farmhouse, a barn going soft at one corner, and behind it, fields she had leased to a corn operation for years until the corn operation got bought by a bigger one that did not bother with small parcels. I knew her from the market, friends. Everybody knew Dot. She sold eggs and opinions, both fresh, both at prices she set and would not negotiate, and she had liked Cole because Cole fixed her ancient tiller one market morning for nothing, lying in the gravel behind her stall in his good shirt, and Dot Ansell does not forget a man who ruins a shirt for her. So in July, 4 months a widow, 3 days after the cemetery, I drove Jamie's borrowed hatchback out Millbrook Road with the notebook on the passenger seat like a co-pilot, and I stood on Dot's porch, and I asked if I could rent a piece of her backfield to grow flowers on. And Dot looked at me a long moment through her pipe smoke, and she said, the Whitaker widow. I said, the Whitaker widow. And she said, I heard what they did. The whole market heard. And then she looked past me at her empty field for a while, and she said, 1/4 acre to start. The lease is $1 a year, and you keep my egg customers happy at your stall. And before you thank me, girl, understand me. This is not charity. I have watched that family buy this county by the acre my whole life, and there is nothing I would rather grow out there than something they couldn't keep. Friends, I cried in front of Dot Ansell exactly once, and it was then on the porch, day 1, and she let me have about 40 seconds of it and then said, that's enough of that. Waters for the plants. And that sentence has been the official policy of my farm ever since. Waters for the plants. The first year, friends, I will give it to you honest because the internet is full of flower farm fantasies and the truth smells like manure and burnt coffee. I kept the garden center job. Dawn belonged to the 1/4 acre, then $11 an hour of other people's watering, then the evening belonged to the 1/4 acre again, and I built my first beds by headlamp, friends, actual headlamp, double dug by hand because tractors were for someday, and Dot would come out some evenings and sit on her tailgate and supervise, which meant smoke, criticize, and tell stories, and I came to live for the tailgate. Friends. It was the first place in a year where somebody talked to me like a farmer instead of a tragedy. I planted what makes money fast first: zinnias, sunflowers, cosmos, snapdragons, the honest workhorses, and that October I stood behind my market table, the one thing too small to take, and for the first time in my life I sold flowers I grew. Sold out by 10:30, friends. Drove back to Dots with $91 in a cigar box and sat in the hatchback and held it like a newborn. $91. Corinne had taken 31,000 and it had not made a sound, friends, and this 91 hollered. That is the arithmetic nobody teaches you. Money you grew weighs 100 times what money you were allowed to use ever weighed. I want to stop inside that first year a little longer, friends. 3 scenes of it, because the montage version of rebuilding is a lie the internet tells, and the women actually living my year 1 deserve the true texture. Scene 1, the couch ledger. Jamie's couch was 71 inches long, friends. I know because I measured it one insomniac night with a tape measure from her junk drawer, and I am 5'7", which meant every night was a negotiation. And Jamie, who worked billing at the clinic and had exactly no room and even less money, never once in 14 months, made me feel like arithmetic. But I felt like arithmetic, friends. That is the part nobody says out loud. Charity you cannot repay, yet sits on your chest at 3 in the morning with its whole weight. And what saved me was Jamie's rule, which she announced the first week with a magnet on the fridge. The rule was, rent is 1 dinner a week and 1 true sentence a day. Dinner I could do, I had a cast iron pan and a garden center discount on dented cans. The true sentence was harder, friends. She would not accept fine. Every day, 1 true sentence. And some days my true sentence was, I hate her so much I scare myself. And some days it was, I forgot his voice for 2 hours today. And I don't know if that's healing or losing him twice. And Jamie would just nod and file it and hand me a fork. 14 months of true sentences, friends. That couch was the first honest address of my new life, and when people ask me now what a widow actually needs, I tell them, shorter than her, softer than a bench, and 1 person a day who refuses to accept fine. Scene 2, the garden center. $11 an hour watering other people's someday, and mostly it was mercy, mindless, and green, but twice it cut, and both cuts taught me. The first was a Saturday in September when a woman came in for chrysanthemums, and it was Mrs. Prentice from the church the Whitakers attend, and she recognized me at Register 4 in my apron. And friends, I watched her face do the whole arithmetic of the county's gossip in 1 second, and then she leaned in, kind as a bruise, and said, "It's so good you're keeping busy, sweetheart." Keeping busy. Like grief was a hobby I had taken up. Like the apron was a phase of the phase. And I smiled the retail smile and bagged her mums, and I cried about it exactly once in the fertilizer aisle for 90 seconds on my break, and then a thing happened that I hold on to harder than the cut. My manager, a big quiet man named Dale, who mostly communicated in pallet jack, found me at the time clock after, and he said, "Heard Prentice found you." And I said, "I'm fine." And Dale said, "Yeah." Anyway, watering crews short Sundays, it pays time and a half, and it's just you and the plants. No customers if you want it. That was the whole speech, friends. Time and a half and no customers. Working men comfort you in schedule adjustments, and I have never forgotten it. And when Dale retired last year, my farm did the flowers for his party, and I would not let him see the invoice because there wasn't one. Scene 3, the frost. My first October on Dot's quarter acre, I got cocky, friends. The zinnias were roaring, the market money was real, and the almanac said 10 more frost-free days, and I had a wedding inquiry, my first, a tiny backyard thing but a wedding, for the following weekend, and I left everything standing to have maximum stems. And the frost came early, friends. Of course it came early. I drove out at dawn, and the whole quarter acre was silvered and dead, every zinnia black by 9 a.m. The wedding flowers, The next 3 market weekends, all of it, gone in one clear, cold night. And I stood in the middle of my dead first farm and screamed, once, actually screamed, at the sky, like a crazy woman. Because sometimes, friends, the year just keeps finding new floors. And Dot came off her porch in her robe, 80 years old, picked her way down the field rows, stood next to me in the ruin, and surveyed it with her pipe unlit and said, early frost. And I said, everything's dead, Dot. The wedding's Saturday. It's over. And Dot Ansel looked at me, friends, and then she said the sentence that runs my business to this day. She said, girl, nothing a farmer plans survives contact with October. That is not the job. The job is what you do by Thursday. Now, my cellar's got dahlias in crates my knees can't lift anymore. 40-year-old varieties nobody's grown since my sister passed. They've been asleep down there for 3 seasons, and dahlias don't care about first frost that already happened. Get the wheelbarrow. Your wedding will have flowers no florist in this state can buy. Friends, that backyard bride carried heirloom dahlias the color of a bruised sunset, varieties with no commercial name, out of an 80-year-old woman's cellar, and her photographer put the bouquet on the internet. And that photograph, that dead frost, borrowed cellar, grief, and wheelbarrow bouquet, is the single image that launched every wedding Someday Farm has ever booked since. The worst morning of my first year became the founding photograph of the business by Thursday. That is the job, friends. The frost is not the story. The frost is never the story. Thursday is the story. Winter, I studied like a woman possessed, seed catalogs, spacing charts, the brutal math of stems per bed foot, and Jamie built me a website at her kitchen table for the price of pizza. And I needed a name, friends, and I want you to know I sat with the cursor blinking for a long time because names are dangerous in my county. Whitaker was their name. Meg's Flowers was nobody's. And then I looked at the notebook on the table, the coffee rings, the one word, and there was never really a choice. Friends. Someday Farm. I typed it and I cried, and then I remembered the water policy and got back to work. Year 2, Dot moved me to a full acre without being asked. Same dollar, and the wedding started. Friends, small ones first. A market bride who wanted buckets of zinnias for a backyard thing. Then her cousin. Then a coordinator at the Vineyard Event Barn who liked that I answered emails at 5 a.m. And by that 2nd October, Someday Farm had done 11 weddings, and I had quit the garden center and hired my first help, 2 market kids for harvest mornings, and I had a used pickup, friends, a 1999 with rust and dignity, title in my name alone, and I am not ashamed to tell you I laminated the title. It hangs in the barn to this day. People think it is a joke. It is not a joke, friends. It is the founding document. And it was that November, 14 months after the funeral, cleaning out my phone's voicemail on a Sunday, that I found the message from Hartley Farm Supply, 40 minutes north, a woman's voice, apologetic, saying, Mrs. Whitaker, we've called a couple times over the years. We have an order in cold storage under Cole Whitaker. Paid in full. We'd hate to dispose of it. Please call us. An order. Paid in full. 2 years in their cooler. I drove up there on a Monday morning with my heart in my mouth, friends, and a kind woman in a Carhartt led me back into the cold to a pallet with a tag on it, and on the pallet, banded in bundles, roots. 200 peony roots, friends. Herbaceous peonies, 6 varieties, ordered in January before the February ice, paid in cash, and stapled to the invoice. In the handwriting I know better than my own, a note to the supplier. It said, holding for spring pickup. Anniversary surprise. Don't call the house. Call my cell. My wife works the market Saturdays and she can't know. Her favorite. Plant first. Friends. Her favorite. Plant first. The exact words from the notebook, underlined 3 times, and I stood in a cold storage room in a farm supply warehouse holding a 2-year-old invoice, and the kind woman in the Carhartt quietly stepped out and let me come apart in the 40-degree dark, water policy suspended. Friends, for one morning only, by unanimous vote of everyone present, which was me and 200 peonies. My husband's last purchase on this earth was the first line of my farm plan. He had been building the someday behind my back, friends, the whole time, cash so I would not see the account, timed for our anniversary, and the ice took him 19 days before he could tell me. And the strings, all of Corinne's strings, every title and deed and partnership, not one of them had reached into that cooler because love paid cash. Friends. Love paid cash and left no name for anyone to repossess but mine. I planted all 200 that week in November, in the cold, which is when peonies want planting anyway, because even his timing, friends, even the timing held, and peonies take 3 years to really bloom. Remember that. Everything in this story takes 3 years to bloom. Now I have to bring Corinne back into the story, friends, because you have been enjoying the flowers, and so had I, and that is always when the certified mail comes. Understand what the county looked like by the middle of year 3. Someday, farm was not a widow's hobby anymore. 2 acres in production, a high tunnel, 32 weddings booked, a girl and a half of payroll, and my buckets in 3 grocery stores. And the market stall had a line now. Friends, an actual line, and lines in small counties are newspapers. Everyone knew whose widow I was. Everyone knew what had been taken. And everyone could now watch, every Saturday, what had grown anyway. And for a woman like Corinne Whitaker, friends, who had written me off as a phase, notarized, my little pickup with the farm name on the door driving past the dealership every market morning was not commerce. It was testimony. The first move was small, the way first moves are. A letter from the family's attorney on heavy paper expressing concern that my business's marketing traded on the Whitaker name and reputation and inviting me to rebrand away from any association. Friends, my business was called Someday Farm. My website did not contain the word Whitaker anywhere. I had made sure of it from day one. I wanted their name on nothing I grew. And Jamie and I read that letter at her kitchen table and laughed until we wheezed. And then, because grief makes you wise in weird ways, I stopped laughing and said, wait. This letter isn't about the name. This letter is a scout, friends. She is checking whether I have a lawyer yet. So I got one. A sharp young woman named Priya. No, forgive me. That was somebody else's war. Mine was named Elena, one of Legal Aid's folding chair volunteers gone into private practice who remembered me and who read the letter and said, this is nothing, but keep every envelope from now on. And friends, you know me by now. I was already keeping the envelopes. The second move was the whisper. It reached me the way whispers reach you, sideways, at the market. A coordinator gone suddenly formal, a bride's mother asking odd questions about my licensing, and finally a grocery buyer, a decent man, telling me straight, somebody's been saying you left the Whitakers holding debts, that the family had to absorb your obligations, that they basically paid you off and you're playing the victim, that they paid me off, friends. $31,000 of our own savings kept, and the story running through the county was that I had been paid. And I want to tell you what I did about the whisper, because it is the entire difference between year 1 Meg and year 3 Meg. Nothing. I did nothing, friends. No posts, no counter whispers, no crying at coordinators. I grew flowers. Because here is what Dot said. On the tailgate, pipe going, when I came to her boiling about it. She said, girl, in a small county, there are 2 records. What gets said and what gets seen, and said always loses to seen, given time. They see you at that stall every Saturday at 6 a.m. They see your beds from the road, straight as churches. Let her spend her name on talk. You spend yours on Rose. And I have to show you how the whisper actually died, friends, because I told you I did nothing. And that is true of my mouth. And it is not quite true of my Thursdays. So here are the 2 scenes that finished it. The first was the vineyard. The coordinator out there, Renata, had gone formal on me mid-season. Emails suddenly starting with per our agreement, my buckets inspected like contraband, and I knew the whisper had reached her, and I knew that anything I said would just be the gold digger defending herself, so I did the only thing I trust. I kept showing up an hour early. I kept my buckets cleaner than her glassware, and in August, her biggest wedding of the year, 300 guests, the bride's flower order from a city florist collapsed 2 days out, friends, a truck problem, a refund, a catastrophe with lace on it, and Renata called me at 9 at night, formal voice cracked wide open, asking if there was anything I could do by Saturday. By Thursday, friends. The job is always what you do by Thursday. My girls and I cut that farm down to the roots, and I called two grower friends from the market and bought their weekend stock at full price cash. And we built 300 guests of flowers in Jamie's garage in 31 hours. And Saturday at noon, it was standing in that vineyard barn like it had been planned since spring. And at the end of the night, Renata found me breaking down buckets by the dumpsters, and she stood there a second, and then she said, "I heard things about you, this spring, from a woman at my church." I said, "I know." And Renata looked at the barn, all that rescue blooming in the candlelight, and she said, "You want to know what I've decided. Anyone who's been robbed the way she says you robbed them doesn't answer their phone at 9 p.m. for the family that did it to a stranger's wedding. Thieves don't rescue." And she put me on the vineyard's preferred list that Monday, friends, the printed one, the one that goes in every bride's folder, and the whisper hit that list and died the way whispers die, of insufficient evidence against the visible record. Said always loses to seen, given time. The tailgate gospel, friends, proven in a barn. The second scene is smaller and stranger, and I have never told anyone but Jamie. It was that same fall, a Tuesday evening, nearly dark, and I was alone on the acre stripping beds, and a car came down Millbrook Road slow, too slow, and stopped on the shoulder across from the field, engine running, lights on, and just sat there. The good car, friends, I knew the car. And I stood up in the half-dark in my rows, dirty to the elbows, and I did not wave and I did not hide. I just stood there in the middle of what I was building, visible, the way Dot taught me, and for a full minute, maybe two, Corinne Whitaker sat on the shoulder of a gravel road and looked at her son's widow standing in a field of flowers, and I looked back at the shape of her behind the headlights. Neither of us moved, friends. And then the car pulled away, slow, no drama, taillights down the road toward town, and I stood there in the dark listening to the engine fade, and I want to tell you what I understood in that minute, because it changed how I fought the whole rest of the war. She had not come to spy on a business. Nobody scouts zinnias at dusk. She had come to look at the thing the county was talking about, the widow who would not leave and would not sink and would not shout, and friends, a woman like Corinne only comes to look in person at exactly one kind of thing. A problem her money has not solved. I was no longer a phase, friends. Standing in that dark field, I had been promoted. I was now a fact. And money can end phases, but facts. Facts you have to make offers on, which is exactly what she did next. And then came the third move, friends. And the third move was not small. And it is the reason this story has the ending it has. In the spring of year 3, Dot's nephew, who lives in the city and smells like cologne through the phone, according to Dot, convinced her it was time to think about her estate, and landmen started appearing on Millbrook Road the way crows appear at a dropped sandwich, and word went out that the Ansel-back parcels might come available. And friends, my entire farm, every bed, every peony, the high tunnel, all of it, sat on $1 a year lease on land that was suddenly in play. I heard it from Dot herself. Porch, evening, pipe unlit for once, which is how I knew it was serious. She said, "I'm 80, Meg. The knees are lying to me and the nephew is circling, and he is not wrong about everything. That is the worst part of nephews. I am going to sell the back 6 before somebody sells it for me." And I said, around the stone in my throat, "Okay, how long can I have to move the farm?" And Dot Ansel looked at me through the porch, dark, like I had said something genuinely stupid, friends. And she said, "Move it. Girl, I am not telling you to move it. I am telling you to buy it. 6 acres, friends. The county's number on the parcel was $140,000. And I had a farm's whole life savings of $22,000 and a used pickup and a laminated title and Elena and a banker at First County who liked my books because, oh, friends, you know me, my books were beautiful. 3 years of every receipt scanned the day it existed. The bank could do some of it with the equipment and the contracts as collateral. It could not do all of it. And while I was doing that arithmetic at every red light in the county, the fourth move happened. the Whitaker Land Partnership made Dot an offer for the back six. Cash, 165,000, 25 over the county number, 30-day close, no contingencies, hand-delivered, friends, by Corinne herself, in the good car, up the dirt of Millbrook Road, to Dot's porch. 15 years of watching her buy the county by the acre, and I want you to understand there was no development plan, friends, no dealership annex, no cousin who needed a home site. The partnership had never once looked at Millbrook Road. There was one thing on that land worth $165,000 to Corinne Whitaker. Me? Gone. Rootless again, friends. The phase finally ended, the testimony plowed under, and this time with paper so clean nobody could even call it cruel. Just business. An old woman getting top dollar for her dirt. And friends, if you have been with this channel long enough, you know that the villain's best move and the story's best scene are always the same afternoon. Because Dot called me that night, and all she said was, "Closing's Friday at Elena's office, 9 o'clock, wear a clean shirt." And I said, "Dot, closing on what? I can't match." And Dot Ansel, 80 years old, said the sentence I want on a plaque in every market stall in America. She said, "Girl, money is the loudest bid. It is not the only one. 9 o'clock. Clean shirt." If you have ever wanted to sit in the good chair at one single closing in your life, friends, tap that like button now, because Friday, 9 o'clock, Elena's office is the room this whole story was growing toward, and I am going to give it to you the way it happened, word for word where it matters. I wore the clean shirt. Dot wore what Dot wears and brought the nephew, who had driven in from the city to stop this exact meeting. Friends, let us be honest about why he came, and Elena had papers in tidy stacks, and I still did not fully know what we were doing because Dot had refused to discuss terms on the phone. Terms are porch business or paper business, girl, nothing in between. And Dot sat down and put her pipe on the table unlit, like a gavel, and said, "Here is what is happening today, and everyone can save their breath because I have been deciding things since before any of you had teeth. I am selling Meg the back six at the county's number, 140,000. Not the Whitaker number, the county's number, because I am not greedy, I am right, and there is a difference. And at my age, it is the only difference left worth defending. She has 22,000 down. I am carrying the rest myself, owner financed, 10 years, at the interest my savings account pays, which is an insult, so she may as well be the one insulting me. Elena has drawn it clean. Contract for deed, recorded today, and if I die before it is paid, and I will, the note passes to my estate and the nephew here can enjoy receiving her checks, which will arrive, friends. She looked at me here on the 1st of every month like weather, because I have watched this girl pay $1 a year on time for 3 years, and there is no better credit report on this earth. The nephew, to his credit, friends, and I am told Cologne men rarely have this in them, looked at the papers, looked at his aunt, looked at me, and said only, "The Whitakers offered 25 over." And Dot said, "They did." And he said, "Why?" And Dot said, "Because she is standing on it, and everyone in this room knows it, and I would sooner deed this field to the crows." And then, friends? Then Dot Ansel reached into her coat, her actual barn coat, at a closing table, and took out a jam jar. A jam jar, friends, with a lid, and inside it, folded small, a piece of paper and a $100 bill, and she set it on the table in front of me next to the deed papers, and the whole room went still, and Dot took her time, because 80-year-old women have earned the right to pace a scene, and she said, "Before you sign, girl, you should know you are not the first person to try to buy this field." I said, "The corn operation." She said, "No." 4 years ago, in the fall, a young fella came out here, said he had seen my back 6 from the road 100 times driving parts up to the co-op, said it was the prettiest dirt in the county, said, and here Dot recited it, friends, recited like a poem she had kept dusted. He said, "Ma'am, I am not ready yet. I have a wife who grows flowers and a number I am getting close to, and I know it is not for sale today, but when it is, I would like to be first in line." And I told him lines cost money, and he laughed, and he took out $100 bill and asked for a receipt. So I wrote him one. On the back of a feed store flyer, friends. It is in the jar. I have been holding his place for 4 years. I could not breathe, friends. I unfolded the paper with wet hands, and there it was, in pencil, in Dot's iron handwriting, received of Cole Whitaker, $100, holding his place in line for the back 6 acres whenever the day comes, signed D. Ansel, and dated October, 4 months before the ice, 5 weeks before a budget page that said, "Getting close, tell her." "I've seen the field, Meg, it's 6. He had seen the field, friends. It was this field. It had always been this field. The one he drove past hauling parts, the one he drew in a spiral notebook with a greenhouse and 200 peonies, and my name on every 3rd page. And for 3 years, without knowing it, grieving him by headlamp, I had been building our farm on the exact dirt my husband had already chosen, already walked, already put $100 and his word down on. I did not pick the land, friends. The land was picked. I just came home to it the long way, through the dark, following flowers. Dot let me sit in it for a while, the water policy formally suspended for the 2nd time in recorded history, and then she pushed the jam jar toward me and said, "The 100 comes off the price, obviously. It was a deposit." And I said, "Dot, why didn't you tell me? 3 years, why didn't you tell me the first day I stood on your porch?" And Dot Ansel picked up her unlit pipe and looked at it and said the truest thing anyone has said in this entire story. So hear it, friends. Hear it all the way down. She said, "Because grief makes people build shrines, girl. And shrines don't get weeded. If I had told you that first day whose field it was, you'd have planted it crying and treated every row like a gravestone, and it would have broken you by August. I needed you to build it as yours. Now it can be his too. Order matters, girl. Order matters in everything." And she picked up the pen and signed and slid the papers to me, and I signed my name, my own name, alone, on 6 acres of recorded earth, and Elena stamped it, and the nephew shook my hand, and Dot stood up and put her pipe back in her teeth and said, "Well, that's done. Somebody feed the crows the bad news." Friends, on the 1st of every month for the rest of that woman's life, I did not mail the check. I drove it out Millbrook Road and put it in her hand on the porch and stayed for the pipe and the stories, because some debts you pay in money and some you pay in Tuesdays, and Dot Ansel was owed both and got both. And if the back half of this story has a patron saint, she is 80 years old and smells like cherry tobacco and could negotiate the devil into owner financing. Corinne learned she had lost the field the way she learned everything, friends, from paper, the recorded deed appearing in the county's weekly transactions column, Ansel to Whitaker, M, 6 acres, Millbrook Road, and I am told by people who were in the dealership office that week that the silence around that little column of newsprint lasted days. Whitaker, M. Her own name, friends, the one thing she never thought to repossess, recorded forever on the one field she could not buy. Before the peonies and the cemetery, friends, I owe you the first morning, and the barn raising because the deed was recorded on a Friday. And what happened over that next month is the part of the story I would keep if I could only keep one part. The first morning was Saturday dawn, the day after the closing. Market day, but I drove out an hour early alone, and I parked by the stand and I walked my field. Mine, friends. The same rows I had walked 10,000 times as a tenant, the same dirt, the same beds, and I want to testify to something strange and true. It was not the same. The ground gains weight when it is yours. Every step landed different. I walked the whole 6 acres fence line to fence line as the sun came up, past the high tunnel, past the peony block with its 3rd spring coming, down to the low corner where Cole's 6 acres met the creek he never told me about, and I stood where the water sound starts, and I said, out loud, to the field, to the creek, to the man who put $100 down on all of it, we're home. Took us the long way. We're home. And then I went and sold flowers, friends, because it was Saturday, and the dead man I love ran a shop floor his whole life and would have been scandalized by a missed market. The barn raising came 3 weeks later, and I did not organize it. Jamie organized it, which I found out on the Thursday when she informed me in her billing office voice that Sunday was blocked on my calendar and I would be providing the field and saying thank you and nothing else. Because here is what had happened, friends. The greenhouse, the real one, the one from the notebook, drawn twice because we argued about the door, had been quoted to me at $11,000 in materials, and I had been putting it off for the land payments, and Jamie had gotten tired of watching me price it every winter like a pilgrimage. So she went to the market people. And Sunday morning, friends, they came down Millbrook Road like a parade. The Hendricks brothers with their flatbed and a concrete mixer. Sophia from the bread stall whose husband frames houses with his whole crew and their nail guns. Dale from the garden center, retired by then, with a truck bed of irrigation fittings he had been, quote, holding on to. My market kids, both of them, with their entire families, and Renata from the vineyard with a coffee urn the size of a water heater, and Dot on her porch directing traffic with the pipe like an air marshal. And here is the part where I stop being able to tell it smooth, friends, so I will just tell it. When I tried to protest the lumber, the pile of it, the sheer donated cost of it, Sophia's husband waved me off and said, most of it's paid for anyway, some of us went in on it, and he handed me the receipt from the lumber yard because he knows I keep receipts. Everyone knows I keep receipts. And stapled to the receipt was a page. Friends. A photocopy. Of a page from my own notebook. From Cole's notebook. The page titled, Customer Someday, with the 4 names on it. Our 4 oldest market friends. Written in his blocky pencil years before he died. Jamie had photocopied it as the invitation. That was the whole invitation, friends. She had sent 4 people a dead man's list with a date on it. And all 4 names came, friends, all 4, and they brought 30 more, and by dark on Sunday, there was a greenhouse standing on Someday Farm with its door exactly where Cole drew it the second time. Because I checked, I stood in that doorway at dusk with the notebook open like a blueprint, and behind me, the whole market community was eating chili off tailgates in my field, and Dot wrapped her pipe on a fence post for quiet, and raised her coffee and gave the only speech of the day. She said, in my experience, family is whoever shows up with tools, to the crew. And that was the toast, friends, in its entirety, and 40-some people drank to it in my field at sundown. And somewhere in the middle of them, I stood holding a spiral notebook, doing the math you cannot laminate. Corinne had a trust, a dealership, a partnership, and a name on half the county. I had a field with the right door on it and 40 people who came when a dead man's list called them. And if you are keeping score at home, friends, and I know some of you are, that is the scoreboard. That was always going to be the scoreboard. I braced for the counterattack all that summer. It never came. And it took me a long time to understand why. And the understanding arrived, like everything in this story, in June at the cemetery. So let me take you there and we will finish where we started. The peonies bloomed that spring. 3rd year, friends, right on schedule, 200 plants Cole never saw, in 6 varieties. And if you have never stood in a 1/4 acre of peonies at 6 in the morning, I cannot help you. There are no words. It is like the ground decided to apologize for everything all at once. The brides lost their minds. The grocery buyers called me, friends, me, and Someday Farm's little cooler sold out of peonies every single week of the season. Except for 1 bucket I held back every Friday. The best stems on the farm, and every Saturday evening after the market, I drove them to the cemetery and did what I had quietly done for 3 years by then. I dressed my husband's stone, his own flowers, friends. The anniversary surprise, delivered late, weekly, forever, from her favorite, Plant First, to his headstone, and I never once left a card, because the flowers were the card. And this, it turns out, is the thread that ends the story. Because that June, on a Saturday evening, golden hour, I came up the cemetery row with my bucket and my shears, and there was a figure already at the stone. Corinne, older, friends, smaller than the woman with the certified mail, the way 3 years makes some people smaller, and she was standing very still, looking at the fresh peonies from the week before, the ones just starting to drop. And she heard my footsteps and turned, and we stood there, the 2 of us, the whole war, 20 feet of mowed grass apart. and my mother-in-law looked at the bucket in my hand, this week's peonies, and at last week's on the stone, and I watched her do the arithmetic she had apparently been circling for a long time, and she said quietly, "It's been you. 3 years. The flowers." The groundskeeper said someone came Saturdays, and I thought, and she stopped. And her chin did a thing I had never seen it do, friends, and she said, "I told people it was probably one of his old friends. I could not let myself think it was you. Because if it was you, then." And she could not finish it, friends, so I am going to finish it for you the way I finally understood it standing in that row. If it was me, then the Fays had loved him. If it was me, then the market girl had been dressing her son's grave every Saturday for 3 years without signing it, without leveraging it, without telling one soul in a county that would have handed me the moral victory on a plate. If it was me, then everything she had taken, the house, the car, the savings, she had taken from the person who loved him most publicly for free and grieved him most privately for nothing, and every string she had ever pulled had been pulled against the wrong girl. And I looked at Corinne Whitaker across her son's stone, friends, and I said the sentence I had been growing for 3 years without knowing it. I said, "You told me I could keep the grief." I did. I kept all of it. And then I planted it. And I set down the bucket, and I dressed the stone the way I do, stem by stem, taking my time, water policy holding, friends, barely, and Corinne stood and watched me work. And when I finished, she said, in a voice I had never heard her use, "The peonies. Where do you get peonies like that?" And friends, I could have said anything. I could have opened the whole cooler of it, the invoice, the cash, the note, don't call the house, her favorite, plant first, and buried her where she stood, and there was a version of me, year one me, couch me, that had rehearsed exactly that speech for nights on end. I said he bought them. 200 roots, before the ice. An anniversary surprise. I found the order 2 years too late, and I planted every one, and these are them, and they will bloom every June for the next 50 years. And Corinne, you should come see the field sometime. It grows things that aren't anybody's to take. My mother-in-law stood in that cemetery, friends, with her son's last gift blooming between us in a 5-gallon bucket, and she aged and softened and broke and reassembled in the space of about 10 seconds, and what came out the other side did not apologize. Hear me. This is not that story. Some buildings never turn that light on. What she said was, "He never told me about any field." And I said, gently, because gently was finally affordable, no. He didn't tell me either. He told the dirt. Turns out he told everyone who was listening. She comes in June now, friends. Once a year, the first Saturday of peony season, a standing order called in proper through the website like anybody, 1 bucket, best stems, and she drives out Millbrook Road herself and picks it up at the farm stand, and we speak for 10 minutes about weather and stems, and she has never once been past the stand into the field because the field is not hers, and both of us finally know exactly what that means, and there is a peace in it, friends, not warmth, peace, which is rarer and keeps better. And one more June before I let you go, friends, the June after the peonies, because the field had one more debt to pay, and it paid it in front of everybody. Jamie got married on Someday Farm. My couch landlord, my true sentence collector, my website builder, my events manager, fell for the vineyard's assistant sommelier somewhere between my 30th and 40th wedding, which the two of them still argue about. And when he proposed, Jamie drove straight out Millbrook Road, walked into my field, and said, "I have seen every wedding you have ever done, and I want the one nobody else can book. I want it here, in the rose." Friends, we closed the farm for the only Saturday in its history. The aisle ran down the center path of the peony block in full bloom, June at its most shameless, and the arch was built by Sophia's husband from cedar offcuts of my own greenhouse, and Dot sat front row aisle in her good dress with her pipe in her pocket, unlit, out of respect, she announced, but present, out of principle. Dale ran the parking. Renata ran everything else, off-duty, ferociously, for free. And the flowers, friends? The bride carried peonies, obviously, the best 24 stems the farm has ever produced before or since. And when I handed her the bouquet that morning in the barn, Jamie, who had accepted 14 months of my true sentences without once flinching, looked down at them and gave me one of hers. She said, "You know what I thought that first month you were on my couch? I thought, this is going to break her and I am going to watch it. And there is nothing I can do but feed her and make her tell the truth once a day. And now I am holding a bouquet that a dead man ordered and a broke widow grew on land an old woman saved. And Meg, I need you to hear this on my wedding day. Nothing got broken. Something got planted. I am marrying a man in the proof. Water policy, friends, catastrophically breached, 10 minutes before a ceremony by the bride. And Renata had to redo both our faces, and she did it muttering about amateurs, and her eyes were wet too, so nobody in that barn had standing. And there was one guest I should mention. The girls found the standing order in the system that week. The June Bucket, Best Stems, C. Whitaker, and Jamie. Friends, Jamie of all people, the one who had watched the whole war from the front row of it, said, "Invite her." And I said, "Jamie." And she said, "Not for her, for the field. Let the field show her what it does on its best day." Some people only ever understand a thing when they see it dressed up. So the pickup slip that week had one extra line on it, handwritten, "You are welcome to stay for the 2 o'clock. Back row is open. No reply needed." And at 2 o'clock, friends, when Jamie came down that peony aisle on her father's arm, I looked once, quickly, at the back row. The good car was parked by the stand. And Corinne Whitaker sat alone at the end of the last row, in dove gray, with her bucket of her son's flowers on the chair beside her like a +1. And she stayed for the vows, and she slipped out during the dancing, and she never once spoke to me. And on the seat where she had been, the girls found the bucket, left behind with a florist's card tucked among the stems, unsigned in handwriting I know from certified letters. It said, "They never looked like this in the shop coolers. He was right about the field." That is all it said, friends. He was right about the field. It is not an apology. I have told you all night, some buildings never turn that light on, and I no longer stand in their driveways waiting. But I put the card in the drawer, the top left, the one that never gets inventoried, with the gloves and the gum and the unfinished bench, because that is where this family keeps the things that stopped mid-line. And the bucket, friends, the bucket she left behind. The girls washed it and put it back in rotation, and it is somewhere in my cooler right now, indistinguishable from every other bucket, full of somebody's wedding, and I find that fitting beyond the ability of anyone to have planned it. Everything gets planted eventually, friends. Even the buckets come home. The rest is quickly told. Someday Farm is 4 acres in production now, 2 greenhouses, the second one's door exactly where Cole drew it. I checked the notebook the day we hung it, and 5 women on payroll, market kids and 1 retired teacher and Jamie, who quit her office job to run my events. And we did 51 weddings last year, and the laminated pickup title hangs in the barn next to a framed feed store flyer. Friends received of Cole Whitaker, $100, holding his place in line, and under them both, on a little shelf, a jam jar and a spiral notebook that says, "Someday." The girls think the shelf is decoration. Dot knows better. Dot is 83 and supervises Harvest Fridays from a lawn chair I bought her that lives in the barn, and she calls the peonies those apology flowers, and she is not wrong, friends. She is never wrong. It is infuriating, and I hope it never stops. So here it is, the whole story in one line, for whoever is sleeping on the couch tonight with their life in trash bags. They can take everything with a name on it. The house, the car, the savings. They were never the marriage, friends. They were just the furniture of it. And furniture has titles, and titles have strings, and strings have hands. But what you build after, out of the notebook and the dirt and the $91 in the cigar box, the thing you water at dawn with your own aching arms, that thing takes root below the paperwork, friends, where the strings don't reach. Losing everything is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is just the world clearing the field. So keep the grief, keep all of it, and then, friends, plant it.